Hello, friends, and welcome to Figure Study, where we appreciate the form in Transformers. And today, I'm going to do a video that I've actually been wanting to do for quite some time. And that is, I wanted to talk about Generations Drift and Blurr. Now, they're both the same mold, but there's a very specific reason why I wanted to talk about both of them. Not just because they're the same mold, but, they are, so I figured two birds with one stone. But I also wanted to talk about not just the figures themselves, but just how much small differences, not just coloring and molding differences, but like small differences in terms of like fan moding can actually make to a figure's look. And you'll kind of know more of what I'm talking about when I get into actual robot modes. But yeah, Drift and Blurr, they are both the same thing, only Drift has a spoiler and is white and red, and Blurr has a much smaller spoiler and is blue and blue and blue and blue. And I think he might also be a little bit blue. He's also Blurr. One thing, though, that does kind of bug me in terms of the different aesthetics is Drift has the painted rims, Blurr does not. Disappoints me that Blurr does not. Because, I say it all the time, I really like it when vehicles have the painted rims. It looks nice. And I know it's not laziness, but it gives me the impression of laziness. And I know they're not being lazy. I don't mean to imply that they're being lazy. It's just when they just slap plastic on there and don't actually bother to paint the tires or the rims, I don't know, it doesn't sit well with me sometimes. I feel like they could have done a little bit more with that. But anyway, he's also got 50 shades of blue on him, so who knows? Maybe that's why they don't have the rims painted. But anyway, overall, the shape of the cars, they're nice. It's nice looking cars. They both are exactly the same except the spoiler. Just looking at the shapes, they're exactly the same except the spoiler. And that's fine. Doesn't really bother me. Honestly, I think I kind of prefer Drift just because Blurr's color scheme is a little bit... I don't dislike the blue. I just feel like there's a little too much in terms of, it's just all shades of blue. Even this white looks slightly blue. And I just feel like, maybe they could have either separated it out a little bit differently, or maybe instead of using 4 different shades of blue, used 3 and just distributed it in more interesting ways. But, could have been a bit better. I guess technically 5 shades of blue, because that's also a very, very dark blue. At least it appears to be a very dark blue. They did do the taillights in red, though, so there's that. Yeah, even here it's light blue. You just can't get away from blue. And then with Drift, you actually have these really nice red detail lines. And yeah, he's white and then with red details, but I actually really like that a little bit better, I think, because it just makes these lines stand out a bit more. And they painted the back there too, so ha. And a little bit of silver there. Although it's interesting how they painted just this part on Drift, and they painted this whole thing on Blurr. I don't know if that was just a painting mistake on one of them or what, but it's a little bit weird that for whatever reason, the painted, as far as the painting goes, it's they wanted to make the grill look bigger on Blurr than on Drift. I don't really understand that. Also, I don't know, the headlights on Blurr seem a little too dark for my taste. Whereas with Drift, I like how they are a little bit lighter. It just looks a bit nicer to me. And then for the rear windows, you've got the silver for Drift and the, again, dark blue for Blurr. Which, I guess technically speaking, the colors match the translucent windshields a little bit better in terms of just the color variations, but I don't know. And again, they're doing that thing I don't like where you've got the clear windshield and windows and then suddenly solid plastic and then painted plastic, and it's just, again, especially with these guys, with a lot of the car formers, honestly, it's why bother giving them translucent windows when all you're going to do is see robot kibble? Although I will say, with these particular figures, it kind of makes sense just because of the robot modes, but I still think they could have probably gotten away with solid ones, but whatever. Regardless, I don't think either one is bad in terms of the look. And, you know, at first glance, because of the drastic difference in color and the lack of a giant spoiler on Blurr, they don't necessarily look like they're the same mold, but I kind of still got to give it to Drift. And I probably should have said this at the beginning of the video, but I'm going to say it now. I could care less what any of you think of Drift as a character. I don't care about any of that Mary Sue nonsense that I've seen people complaining about. I mean, yeah, it's been years, so everyone's probably over it, and that's cool, but if anyone's not over it, I don't care. I don't read the comics. I don't watch most of the shows, except for Prime. Prime was awesome. So I really don't care. Like, I have no connection to Drift as a character. So none of that stuff matters to me. So just getting that out of the way. But anyway, yeah, their vehicle modes, they're the same car, but they don't necessarily look like the same car, and that's fine. And they both look fine. It's just, I think, for me, I think Drift gets a slight edge because I like the red and white and the painted rims more than I like the blue and blue and blue and blue and blue and just a little bit of blue. So yeah. But there we have the vehicle modes, and for scale, there we have Samus. It's about what you expect. So yeah, now let's take a look at their robot modes. So here we have Drift and Blurr in their robot modes. And again, because of the colors, because of the slight difference in molding, at least in terms of the head, and also the slightly different transformation from fan moding, they look very, very different. And this is something I want to talk about with Blurr, I'll get to in a minute, but he's the one you can kind of tell, like, if you're familiar with this figure at all, he's the one I took some liberties with. But yes, so looking at them both, I mean, I really like this mold. It's a very cool mold. I like the big shoulders because, you know, me and big shoulders now, apparently. And it's just very cool. I also really like how the door bits become like sheaths for the swords or holsters for the guns. It's really, really neat. And I like the different options you have in terms of the guns and the giant rifle and the smaller swords and the giant sword. It's all very cool. Now, what I think is really neat is when you transform them normally, you know, very small differences, which I'll get into in a minute, but like if you do the normal transformation, this is what you get, and it has a very interesting kind of samurai look to it, where it's got the big ornate shoulders and the sheaths. The giant boots are kind of but yeah, looks good. But then with a very slight difference, by instead of having the doors pointed back, having them angled forward, and by rotating the shoulder bits forward a bit so that you get these like much larger looking shoulders that go up instead of back, it really dramatically changes the silhouette. And I really like this with Blurr because it almost gives him like a trench coat style look to him. And honestly, I think this reads better as a trench coat than what we got with Crosshairs, who's supposed to be looking like he's wearing a coat of some kind. But this looks really cool, and I think it works really well for him because with all the weapons he has, Blurr comes off as more of a gunslinger type. And I think this fits that really well, whereas Drift is much more of a ninja, samurai, you know, melee type, and I think this really works well for him. So I really like the variability that you get with this mold just based on a few very small changes. So now actually getting into the robot modes themselves, Blurr is still super duper blue. And, you know, again, I just wish there was a little bit more in there that wasn't just blue, but I know Blurr, fine, whatever. He's got At least it's different shades of blue, unlike the Titan's Return version, but, you know, I just wish there was a little bit more there. I mean, he does have a little bit of red for the knees, a little bit of gold in that pelvis area, and then, of course, the Autobot logo, which makes a bit more sense in robot mode than it did in vehicle mode. It's not a bad-looking head. I mean, from what I know of Blurr, he's got, you know, the typical Blurr weird little crest thing on top, but he's got a very kind of almost Gundam-esque, like, swept back, angled, you know, robot thing going, which is, you know, looks good. Even his eyes are blue. Jeez. There's so little on him that's not blue. But I mean, it's a nice looking head. Some really nice detail too. It's like not just the vents, but like these extra little bits that are molded out there, and very nice. And he's got some shoulder details there, which you don't necessarily see when, you know, he's transformed this non-official way, but still looks good. He is not a bad-looking bot. And, you know, there's not as much texture detail in these figures as, say, Titan's Return, but Titan's Return is a much newer line than Generations. So, you know, what can you expect? Yeah. Blurr does look good. Then I like how he's got that, like, you know, that's like transformation difference. He looks much more distinct from Drift. And now Drift, you know, not a lot of paint variation on him either. It's white and red, but then you see a little bit more of this black just because it's, you know, what's exposed. Much less in terms of, I mean, I guess not less, but like his feet versus Blurr's feet. There's definitely more color on Blurr's feet. And that's, I don't know. I mean, he pulls it off okay, but the shape is nice. The only thing I don't like about the shape of Blurr's feet, aside from these giant wheel chunks, sorry, Drift's feet, aside from these giant wheel chunks, which Blurr also has, and I kind of wish these could tuck away a little bit, is Drift has these big spoilers that just get in the way, whereas Blurr's much smaller spoiler makes it easier to, you know, spread his legs out a little bit more and have it look natural. And then, of course, you got the sheaths, which are nice. He's got, it's funny, he's got the same gold on his pelvis area, but instead of here where Blurr has it, he has it down here. Nothing on the chest, though. It's just disappointingly bare, which is unfortunate. Not a bad head, though. Also has kind of that, like, Gundam-esque super robot look. Definitely different head sculpt. And whereas Blurr had painted eyes, Drift has light-piped eyes. And I've never been a huge fan of light piping, because, you know, unless you've got your figure in a light, their eyes don't really stand out at all. So, I don't know, in my opinion, painted eye is usually better. A little bit more... Don't know if you could hear that, but more kittens running around. A little bit more shoulder detail, though. And, of course, he's got these giant pauldron-looking things, which I really, really like. And the nice big sword. Yeah, it's like Blurr and Drift, especially Drift, honestly, are two Generations figures that I really, really like. But I am a little disappointed after seeing the United version, Transformers United version of Blurr. Transformers United version of Drift. Because he's just got, like, a little bit nicer paint on him. And the US Drift, the white is kind of a dingy off-white, whereas the white for the Transformers United version of Drift, the Japanese version, is like a much brighter white, and I think it works a lot better. But I mean, for what he is, he's still very cool. You know, I just prefer the United version, but I'm not going to pay that much money for the United version, so this is what I got. But yeah, Drift and Blurr, they're both the same mold. They both are cool, and again, I really like just how much of a difference you can get by transforming the mold slightly differently. I really dig the trench-coated look for Blurr and the more standard, samurai look for Drift. It's very cool. I'm really glad I got both of these two. I got Drift first, and then was like, oh, let me get Blurr, because Blurr is cool too. And then I was kind of like, oh, but they're both the same. And then I was like, wait, if I transform them slightly differently, they look much more distinct. So yeah, I enjoy that aspect about this. And lest we forget, bring in Samus for size comparison. And they're, as I understand it, typical Generations Deluxe size. Good size. So yeah, that has been my look at Generations, Drift, and Blurr. Great figure either way you get it. I'm more partial to swords in general than guns when it comes to my Transformers, but I think they're both cool. And again, I really like how just that very slight change in transformation actually makes them look much more distinct from each other. So yeah, good times. Can't go wrong with either one. It's a cool figure either way. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching. As per usual, feel free to like, comment, subscribe. Any combination of those three would make me a happy Rob. And remember, art is more than meets the eye.